Hello and welcome to Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck at the intersection of faith and reason. As your host, I come to you from our studios, the mothership in Irondale, Alabama, Mother Angelica Way. And today's topic, a very important one. We're only less than a week out from the election here in the United States. How a Catholic should go about preparing to vote. A lot of people have questions about what are the important issues that as a Catholic you should focus on. You can email us your questions at spitzersuniverse@ewtn.com. You can post your questions on our Facebook page, popularly at facebook.com/EWTN online #FSUniverse. And send us a tweet at twitter.com/EWTN #FSUniverse as well. And always, for all things Father Spitzer, check out the Magis Center website, which is magiscenter.com. And again, today we're going to be talking about voting. So let's get started. There's a lot to discuss. Welcome, Father Spitzer, as we travel out to the West Coast, to Christ Cathedral, our beautiful studios out there in Orange County, California, which my understanding is you've had some rain recently, and that was a big surprise, huh?
We did. We were blessed with quite a bit, actually, about a week ago, and some snippets here and there since that time. So thank the Lord for that.
Right, exactly. And so we're going to be talking, as we have for the last couple of weeks, really about the hierarchy of truths and how people form their conscience. We'll talk some more about that. But we've got a lot of questions from people who have written to us in the various methods of getting to us, whether it be on Facebook or Twitter or email, about preparing to vote. And so here's one of the questions that clearly comes up all the time. This person writes to us, abortion seems to be our #1 issue in voting. Obviously, a lot of Catholics believe that. If a person votes for someone who promotes abortion, is that person not culpable of the sin also? Without life, this is their statement, nothing else matters. Many in our church are tiptoeing around this matter, sending the wrong message. God bless. And of course, that's their opinion there. But there's a lot of people who do feel like, you know, if you're not born, then the rest of it is, you know, doesn't really matter that much. But how as a Catholic, when we're evaluating voting, let's say, not just the fact that abortion is obviously an intrinsic evil, but voting for somebody who, you know, is supporting abortion. You know, we hear a lot also about the personally opposed, but we are actually dealing in this particular election with one of the major candidates who basically seems to be in favor of abortion from the time a child is conceived to virtually through partial birth abortion to the end when a child is basically partially out of the mother. So how should we view this?
Right. Yeah, I'm probably just going to appeal to the Bishop's Voters Guide, and if people want to, you can just go to Google and just put in Bishop's Voters Guide 2016, and you'll get, just zoom down to Part 2 and Part 3, particularly Part 3, where you're going to get the prioritization of the bishops and the rationale for why they have that prioritization. So that's in Part 3, and you could read that honestly in less than a half an hour. So just here's the quick synopsis to answer that question. What the bishops say are three things about abortion. Number one, it is the preeminent threat, and preeminence means surpassing all others. So it's the preeminent threat to our culture, the preeminent threat that we have to consider when voting. And then that's in Part 2. In Part 3, they go on to say this: it is the preeminent requirement that we should be considering when we vote. So this requirement, and they call it a requirement, is surpassing all other requirements, that we protect the life of the innocent. That comes before all others. And in the prelude to that section, Part 3 of the Voters Guide, the bishops say, not all of these issues are weighted equally. Indeed, some are intrinsic evils and can never be permitted. And then what follows is an implicit ordering by the bishops. The #1 thing that comes up, of course, is abortion, and they give the rationale for it. This one, violation of this one particular precept precept is the condition really for all other precepts. So because, the killing of innocent life is so fundamental, all other precepts like the right to liberty, the right to property, the right to happiness, the right to have health care, etc., all of these things follow upon the right to life. And of course, a violation of abortion violates, as it were, everything else in its wake. So the bishops actually prioritize that as the very first thing, and they say in that prioritization that it is never morally justified, and laws that promote abortion should be actively opposed. Now, do the bishops bind us under, pain of sin not to vote for a candidate that has abortion? And they don't. They don't bind us under pain of sin, but they give a very strong assertion and advocacy that we should consider this as our preeminent requirement, because abortion is a preeminent threat. It is intrinsically evil, and it can never be morally justified. It should always be opposed. That's as strong a recommendation as you're going to get to put this at the top of the list of requirements you should consider when you're voting. It just comes very short of binding you under pain of sin, but it does not bind you under pain of sin.
Now, of course, I think some people think sometimes abortion gets listed there because it begins with the letter A, and that's why it's at the top of the list, as opposed to the fact that it's actually there because it is the most heinous and the one that really everything starts from. In fact, I'm from New York State, so I noticed that the Catholic bishops in New York State said the inalienable right to life of every innocent human person outweighs other concerns where Catholics may use prudential judgment. Let's talk about that word, prudential judgment. What do we mean when we say that?
Yeah, there's two things that we talk about when we get into the political order, right? So when when the bishops are speaking, one is called ordinary magisterium. There could be extraordinary magisterium or ordinary magisterium. So when you're dealing with extraordinary magisterium or ordinary magisterium, the bishops are saying you have to believe this, otherwise you are literally in heresy. So that's a very strong assertion of a particular doctrine, and that would include moral doctrines like the prohibition of abortion. So the bishops are saying, yes, the protection of the right to life, and of course the immorality of abortion is a doctrine. It's taught by both extraordinary and ordinary magisterium. If you do not adhere to this, it is clearly heresy. Now, a prudential judgment is another level underneath what's called extraordinary and ordinary magisterium. And that really gets into the hows, how a policy should be crafted in order to get to a particular solution. So, of course, like abortion clearly is taught as I said, as ordinary and extraordinary magisterium. It's taught as a doctrine of the church. You cannot believe otherwise. Whereas other things, for example, how should we carry out our immigration policy? How should we carry out our health care policy? How should we carry out stewardship of creation? How should we carry out programs that are going to prevent poverty on the part of people? Now, what the bishops are saying here with prudential judgment is, yes, there's a wide range of opinions that can take place about how to do it. Now, the idea of should we, in some sense, adhere to the principles of what's called, our social encyclicals, so the church's social teaching. Now, those 7 principles of the church's social teaching, those are taught as it were, with ordinary magisterium. They're taught, with as much infallibility as you're going to get. The principles themselves. But what the bishops say in the compendium on the teaching of the Catholic Church is that there is a wide range of possibilities for figuring figuring out how we're going to carry out a particular mandate, like, for example, a just immigration policy that has a pathway to citizenship, or, you know, a healthcare program that is going to cover people while at the same time protecting the rights of religious liberty and the right to life, etc. So they admit that there's a wide variety. And so those things are prudential judgments which every citizen has to do their very best to inform their conscience. And so there could be agreement and disagreement among the candidates, agreement and disagreement among citizens, without any kind of impinging on doctrine or encountering a heresy. Abortion is different, though, because that's not a prudential judgment. Abortion is a doctrine, and it's a doctrine by clear teaching of the church, not only of the popes and through the church tradition, but also a clear teaching of the U.S. Catholic bishops again and again. I believe they also had in 1998, you know, their letter on life, which reasserts the doctrine and the teaching as ordinary magisterium of abortion as always immoral and unlawful to promote.
Okay, very good. And it's interesting, as you were saying, in a sense, it's a difference. We have to agree on the principle of those things and know that those are good things that need to get done, but we can disagree on some of those other things, on the policy versus the principle and how it gets carried out.
That is correct.
Okay, very good.
That's right.
You brought this up.
It's the what versus the how.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, sorry.
So we have another question that kind of dovetails off of something you just said a moment ago. It says, Dear Father Spitzer, Pope Francis tells Americans to vote their consciences. How does one do that? And what does the church mean by conscience? This is Ray from Louisiana. This is a great question because, again, that whole idea of, you know, some of us, I think, are unconscious in general to what's going on in the world. But, you know, when we're supposed to vote our consciences, what do we mean by that? Is that how I feel about it? How my friends feel about it? How does one go about forming their conscience, and what do we mean by conscience?
Right. The document that I just referred to by the bishops, it's called the Bishop's Voters Guide 2016. The actual subtitle of that document is called Forming Conscience, right? And so the idea here is the bishops are going to give us some general guidelines on how to form our conscience. And this document is split into three parts. The first part is very nice. It's kind of gives you the general context in which parts 2 and 3 are going to come. But you could easily skip down to part 2, and that discusses basically 10 major issues. And again, these issues are prioritized. And so as the bishops talk about it, the first thing they talk about is the right to life and why that's the first thing, the first priority, why it is the preeminent threat to culture and preeminent threat to all individual rights. And it goes through and speaks about that very, very much. It goes through then and talks about the promotion of peace as a secondary issue. It talks then about you know, the third area, which, you know, speaks about you know, what's called the protection of marriage, you know, and precisely the protection of the understanding of marriage as between one man and one woman, with the intention to be permanent and exclusive, you know, within the family, which is the building block of society. So it goes through. That's the third issue. The fourth issue gets into the whole area of religious liberty, which is an exceedingly important issue, and then issues of migration and so forth. Then if you go down to the third part, what the bishops do for you is they really, in bullet points, literally, in about 10 bullet points, they give you a sort of a set of policies to be pursued. They tell you that it is not equally weighted, therefore they're giving it to you you in an implicit priority, and they're telling you that some of these things are intrinsic evils. Let's just quickly go through, some of those things so you get what the bishops are trying to say is important for forming your conscience. So let me just quickly go through the bullets. The number one bullet is called the protection of the most innocent in our culture, namely unborn human beings. And of course, right there we get the intrinsic evil of abortion, which they call the preeminent requirement. So there's no question this is the first priority in the formation of conscience, which must be considered because the sin that we're speaking about, both individually and culturally, that sin is so fundamental, it's against an innocent, it is so heinous, and it literally undermines all other rights in the process. And the bishops are very careful to specify that as an intrinsic evil. The second thing they talk about is the avoidance of violence. And what they're talking about in the avoidance of violence, they give a series of issues in this order. Number one, they're saying you should never make an appeal to violence in order to solve a social problem. So the number one thing is it's inexcusable to have 1 million abortions a year to resolve a problem of unwanted pregnancies. There has to be something else, but our second priority is you cannot do this. They then include other things. They say, secondly, you cannot appeal to assisted suicide as an adequate means of dealing with the challenges of sickness or elderliness. The third area that they deal with is you can't destroy embryos, for experimentation or other purposes. These are human lives. The fourth thing that they appeal to is capital punishment, that you cannot appeal, you can't kill a person capitally if there's no protection that comes from it. And finally, the last thing is that we have to be very careful about the kinds of wars that we deal with. But again, notice that there is that interior prioritization of the issues. The third issue that the bishops talk about, this is a policy issue in a document where priority is important, as they speak to the whole issue of the definition of the understanding of marriage. And so they're saying, look, the family is the building block of society. You have to observe, the complementarity of the sexes, and you cannot allow yourself to be, as it were, undermined by gender ideologies which claim that gender difference is not important. A marriage is contracted with exclusivity and with the intention of permanence, or what's called indissolubility. It is contracted by one man and by one woman for the purposes of creating a family, which family is the building block of society. Couldn't be more clear. We should protect that understanding of family within the society. The fourth area that the bishops get into is the whole area of religious liberty, but in the process they talk also about our need to make sure that people have a proper means of support. So you can't. What the bishops are trying to say, as a fourth and fifth issue, is we have to deal with poverty, and we have to deal especially with poverty of families and of children. And we have to do what we can to make sure that there are means possible for children and for families to live adequately. And then in light of that, that we also have to pursue health care policies to make sure that we provide adequate health care to every single person who needs it. And when doing so, those health care policies must protect the right to life, must protect the right of human dignity, and must protect religious liberty. So we can't have healthcare policies that are going to be coercive or intrusive into the religious liberties of people, which are, obviously within the bounds of any societal acceptance, and by the way, proven by precedent. So that would be another area. The migration and immigration area is exceedingly important to the bishops to make sure, and I might have gypped immigration, it might have been one notch higher as a policy, and they say that it must, we must provide an adequate and just pathway to citizenship. We must treat migrants fairly, and we must make sure that they have, their needs met, even though they may be, whatever way they happen to be in this country, the fact that they're here, we must take care of them. It's part of our Christian duty. Right. And then they go on to describe other areas which are more generic, about promoting good stewardship of creation and peace and things of this nature. But essentially, it's very, very clear how the bishops see their the priorities of policy within that document. And it's just worth, just to inform your conscience, Ray, the main thing you want to do is just go to that document, zoom down to part 3, take 15 minutes and try to thoughtfully go through these things, thoughtfully go through how the bishops prioritize them, thoughtfully go through what they mean by preeminence of an issue, thoughtfully go through what they mean by an intrinsic evil. And I think you'll get a pretty good sense of at least how the bishops see it in 2016.
And also you might want to check on some websites. I know Priests for Life have one where they compare the party platforms. It's a good way, after you inform your conscience in a sense, to then read that and see how it actually plays itself out. Very good. We're going to take a break right now, much more ahead. And don't forget that EWTN has a wonderful pro-life website all about dealing with voting especially, and it's EWTN.com/vote. That's EWTN.com/vote, all about things for Catholics to think about. There it is up on the monitor. Are you prepared to vote? That's what this show is basically about. It reinforces a lot what Father Spitzer is saying and what we'll be talking about through the rest of this program. Stay with us, much more ahead in Father Spitzer's universe. Thanks for staying with us here on Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck with Father Spitzer as well, talking about how a Catholic should go about preparing to vote. Here we are less than a week before the election. The show, obviously, on Wednesday will repeat several times during the rest of this week, so it's something to think about. But all of these programs will air on TV and on radio prior to the election. So some good information. Check out our website on voting, EWTN.com. Very helpful. And let's get back to Father Spitzer. And let me follow up, Father. Here's a question that just came in, and it kind of dovetails after, again, something else you were talking about, where we were talking about the various hierarchy of concerns, preeminence. And one of them many times we'll hear juxtaposed is kind of the abortion versus death penalty. So let's go. I was wondering where the death penalty comes into priority on our list of Catholic life issues. Often the one given the death sentence was not guilty or made amends. Where does preserving a convict's life come into place? And this is from Joshua.
Joshua, on in the second area, first of all, the bishops single out abortion for its own policy issue, and that's the first one, which they call preeminent. And then the second policy issue that they talk about groups 5 other areas of violence to be avoided. Here is how the bishops listed them. Abortion was the number 1 to be considered. Number 2 was euthanasia. Number 3 was the destruction of embryos. Number 4 was capital punishment. Number 5 was the avoidance of wars which are not just wars. And the now, why put that number 4? You know, and here I'm going to have to try and read the bishop's mind because it doesn't really explain the priority per se, but I would assume for 2 reasons. Number 1 is because there may have been a guilty party, and you are correct in saying that frequently enough, you know, the person who is accused of a capital crime and could be given the death penalty may well be innocent, and the Innocence Project has certainly shown that to be the case. However, the bishops, you know, would still say, you know, if you're talking about killing an innocent life all the time, or you're talking about killing the elderly who've done nothing except, you know, try to wade through the propaganda, you know, about assisted suicide, or you're talking about destroying embryos that haven't even had a chance to live. The bishops seem to prioritize those 3 first, and the death penalty in the 4th position. Now, with respect to that, that doesn't mean that the bishops don't care about the death penalty. Absolutely do, since the encyclical on the culture of life, remember, by St. John Paul. And what he advocated was the following, which the U.S. Catholic bishops have followed St. Pope John Paul II in. And that is, he said, look, it used to be the case that capital punishment was necessary, and the Church indeed did approve it for centuries, because, not because it was a deterrent, and certainly not because it was retributive. The Church has always rejected the idea that capital punishment was necessary, certainly for retribution. That goes against Jesus' teaching, which would mean, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And also, as a deterrent, because that's never been proven. But it was necessary in order to prevent criminals from going back on the street, because there was no adequate way of guaranteeing or paying for life imprisonment on the part of capital offenders who had committed capital crimes. So for a long, long time, the Church did in fact permit it. But as St. John Paul said, at this juncture, it doesn't really seem as if any kind of capital punishment is necessary in order to prevent, a criminal who's likely to cause another, capital crime. It doesn't seem like that's really required anymore for the common good. So really, they have changed their position on capital punishment in light of the circumstances. And pretty much now, in the United States, certainly,
well, I was going to ask you that,
the bishops, and it really matters, because sometimes there are cultures which still, are in a bind, but for all intents and purposes, in the U.S. or Western Europe or Japan or something, there's no way that, the bishops feel and the Pope feels that a capital punishment can be justified under the circumstances.
Right. Yeah. Let me mention one thing, because that comes up once in a while. So I was interested myself, so I did my little research. And statistically, from 1976, when these statistics are available, through this time this year, about halfway through, there have been 1,438 executions in the United States. Okay? So 1,438 is since 1976. And since 73, there's been 59 million abortions. So just maybe something for people to take into account when sometimes they're also weighing that. I know that's not the ultimate perspective, but it, again, something to maybe think in terms of when we hear about the death penalty put up against abortion.
Well, I'm sure that weighed heavily in the bishops' minds too. I mean, the vastness of the disaster of abortion is just completely overwhelming, compared to that of capital punishment. So I'm sure that was on their mind in the prioritization as well.
Right, exactly.
Good question.
And of course, in the case of the unborn, they're all absolutely innocent. In the case of the death penalty, some of those people are in fact guilty, though of course we'd like to see them come to Christ or repent. And certainly in the United States, you could make a case to say, for somebody who was pushing for it from a state, to say, well, for the amount of time people sit on death row, there's there's quite a bit of time to think about whether I need to repent. But clearly, it's the more merciful thing in here in the year of mercy to see if there's better ways for us to deal with crime problems in our country. Exactly. Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to another question here. Let's see what we got coming up here. This one fits into what you also mentioned earlier. You're very prophetic here, Father, with the questions coming up. Here is the next one here. It says, one political issue that I worry about as I get older, you should, is assisted suicide. Don't go to the Netherlands. Yeah. My daughter is a nurse with some pro-choice views, okay? So she's got some family issues. I don't want to burden her as I age, but I live in Oregon and I could see the culture moving in the direction of euthanasia. Do you care to comment on this? This is Henry from Portland, who's, I guess, keeping an eye on his pro-choice nurse.
Daughter, Henry, let me just give you a kind of an overview of what the bishops are thinking with respect to assisted suicide. The first thing to note is, yes, assisted suicide is an offense to the life of the elderly. You are quite right. I'm going to make another point in a second called assisted suicide creates a burden, creates a pressure to die on the elderly that they did not have previously, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The third thing is, yes, you are absolutely right, Henry. Assisted suicide does create a culture of death. It does open the path, to the acceptability and to the normative and moral acceptance of suicide within the culture, which does increase suicide rates, not just among elderly people, but among the young. This is really crucial. And the church, by the way, is worried about all three. I mean, the first, thing that's very, very important, for the church, and I'll just get to the main point. There's an old, principle that was articulated originally by John Locke and later by a guy named Baron de Montesquieu. But basically, the principle goes like this: you cannot give a freedom or an option to one group that will impose an onerous burden on another group. So in other words, every legislator, every judge, indeed, even in a plebiscite, a vote, right, that might take place, an initiative, you cannot, through that initiative process or through that legislative process, you can't create an onerous burden on one group in order to give a freedom to another group. As John Locke so playfully put it, right, my freedom to swing my arms around ends where your nose begins. So for all intents and purposes, then, we have to be exceedingly careful. Now, you might be thinking to yourself there, Henry, well, wait a minute, how does this put a burden to die on some group of people? Let me just give you three cases, and you can kind of contemplate on it. All of them come from Oregon, so I think you can get the message. One woman by the name of Kate Cheney, once the Oregon legislation had passed, her daughter went into her physician and asked for a prescription for assisted suicide. The doctor refused to give it to her, essentially because he knew very well that the mother did not want it and was probably psychologically incapable of making that decision. Furthermore, it was referred to a psychiatrist and a psychologist who both agreed the mother was not capable. It was then reviewed, given to another doctor. She went to another doctor, the daughter did, to get the assistance, and he wouldn't do it because of the lack of psychiatric and psychological corroboration. Finally, she found a doctor who would write the prescription, and of course, Kate Cheney was dead within the next couple of days. Now, you have to look at that, and you must say, first of all, do safeguards work? I don't think so. Number two, right? You can go doctor shopping. That's what they call it, doctor shopping, to find somebody to do the job, and the pressure can be put on. The second thing is you have to notice that pressure on Kate did not exist before this legislation occurred. She is the victim of a new pressure.
I see.
So let's just call this Yeah, exactly. So it's this victim, this is a new victim group, and we'll just call it those pressured by family or friends to commit assisted suicide, whether it be because, the burdens of care are hard, I want some money early, whatever the case may be. It could be nefarious, it could be quasi-innocent, but the fact is a whole new group of victims has been created by this legislation. Is it just? No, it's not, and the bishops are saying it has to be resisted. Let's take a second group of people. These are the people who are not culpably pressured to die, but they're indirectly pressured to die because of the intimate relationship that they have with people. For example, the son comes in and to the doctor's office. The doctor says, "Oh, your mother's been diagnosed with terminal illness. She has two choices. She can receive a pain protocol, or she could receive aid in dying. Why don't you go and tell your mom about the choices?" Aid in dying, by the way, Henry, that's the name for assisted suicide. So, of course, the son goes in, he talks to the mother. The mother says, "Gee whiz, what do you mean I have an option to take a pain protocol or to commit suicide? What are you saying? I mean, are you indifferent to my suicide? Are you indifferent to my life?" The very thought and the presentation of indifference is, of course, enough to push somebody without religious or philosophical objections to the contrary, push them over the line to an unwanted assisted suicide. Dr. Kathleen Foley, who is a pain and symptom management specialist, has published widely, has worked for many, many prestigious medical institutes, has published on assisted suicide requests, along with my own mentor, Dr. Ed Pellegrino, and has said unequivocally that the vast, vast majority of suicide requests are reversed. The vast majority of them are reversed when pain and depression are treated adequately. And, by the way, in the vast majority of cases, pain and depression can be treated adequately. So there's really no excuse for it. Let me just give a last group of victims. I could go on about this, but the one that's really important are those who are kind of economically challenged. They don't have the money to buy the impressive new insurance policy that will be required. They have to take advantage of a state insurance policy like the Oregon State Health Plan. Now, in this particular case, a woman by the name of Barbara Wagner, who had, one of the cheaper plans, an Oregon State Health Plan, gets a letter after she's been diagnosed with cancer. "Well, we can't do anything for you to help you with your treatment or life-extending procedures. However, we can give you and pay for assistance suicide." At which point Barbara Wagner says, "Hey, they're willing to pay for me to die, but they're not willing to pay for me to live." Now, but the point is, we are bifurcating our insurance policies, right, by doing this. And we're creating two classes of people: those who can get policies that will give life-extending treatments, etc., and those who cannot, for whom there's going to be only one option, and that's going to be aid in dying or assisted suicide. Now, just think of all these victims. Think about the victims who are just reversibly depressed. That means they're temporarily depressed when they get a diagnosis, but they are going to reverse that depression and the suicide request. When you think about the whole new groups of victims, I mean, these new victims groups never existed before the legislation. They far outnumber by 10, 20, 30 times the number of people who would ever want to avail themselves of the option or freedom for assisted suicide. This legislation not only makes no sense for the bishops, is completely unjust and immoral. And not only that, you're right, Henry, it creates a culture of suicide. At the end of the day, what you're really dealing with when you get down to this issue is what becomes legislatively sanctioned. That means what becomes legalized becomes normative, and what becomes normal becomes moral. This is a very moral, exactly. So what happens all the time? So you give legal sanction, that is, say you legalize something, then it becomes normal, right? If it becomes normal, people say, "Oh, it must be moral because everybody's doing it."
Well, how many?
And so it just goes from A to Z.
Right. Well, how many times in politics do we hear somebody say, "Well, I didn't do anything illegal"? We don't talk about whether it's right or wrong. We just talk about whether it's illegal, or is there enough evidence to prove that what I did was illegal. So we're going to take a break
it's
right now,
okay.
And we'll be back with much more in Father Spitzer's universe. As we can see, a lot of important issues at stake. Stay with us. And we continue on here in Father Spitzer's universe, talking about the topic, how a Catholic should go about preparing to vote. Coming up here in the United States in less than a week, we've got the vote coming up, and there's quite a divergence between the two candidates, something to think about. And we're talking with Father Spitzer, bringing up your questions. And before we go to the next question, Father, let me just ask you about the whole concept of burden. There seems to be, maybe more so than ever before, this idea of burden. Everybody's a burden. You're a burden. This one's a burden. Everything's a burden. Was it always seen that way, or is that a reaction to this kind of a culture of comfort?
Well, I just think it's a function of materialism myself. Essentially, Doug, Gabriel Marcel, a great French philosopher, put it this way. You can either look at a human being as a mystery, that is to say, with a transcendent soul, with unique goodness and lovability, right, with the transcendent purpose of being joined to God in perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home, or you can look at a human being as a problem. You can look at a human being as a thing. And of course, the materialistic viewpoint in history has always led to the idea that people are problems. I mean, I know that the old proverb, everything gets reduced to the Nazi era, but they so well represent it. But so did Rome. I mean, Rome was a materialistic culture, and we see the byproduct. Stalinism was a materialistic culture. We see the byproduct, because the minute you really believe that human beings are nothing more than atoms and molecules, that they don't have a transcendent soul, they don't have transcendent dignity, they don't have unique goodness or lovability, all they are is a bunch of atoms and molecules, all they are is material, then you can expend them, use them any way you want. I mean, materialism, we're talking about metaphysical materialism here, not necessarily ethical materialism, though metaphysical materialism always leads to ethical materialism, but it also leads to treating human beings like a problem. Notice how Marx easily flows from treating, Marx never treated human beings with rights. In fact, there is no rights vocabulary at all in Marxist, ideology and in Marxist writings, because they don't believe in the individual dignity of every human being that causes rights vocabulary to come forth. So what winds up happening is you get to this idea of people are social units, people are economic units. And when people are social units and economic units, if they are disadvantageous social units and economic units, then they're problems. And of course, they're burdens. Burdens to whom? To the society. And suddenly, the individual rights, that is to say, the right of every individual human being gets subordinated to the so-called common good. And when you don't have equivalence of individual rights in the common good, if individual rights don't stand independently of the common good but are subordinated to the common good, you have nothing more than totalitarianism. It doesn't matter what kind of totalitarianism you have. Nazi totalitarianism, Khmer Rouge totalitarianism, Stalinist totalitarianism, Marxist totalitarianism. Everybody is treated like a social unit, an economic unit, and a burden. Now look at the rhetoric that we're getting out of some of our very elitist politicians and social theorists, today, and even some of our media people. They unwittingly are literally subordinating individual rights to the common good, and they're unwittingly treating people like burdens and problems, social units and economic units. And of course, the Catholic Church has always adamantly and staunchly resisted this since the time of Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum, the first social encyclical, which demanded the individual dignity of every human being that rests not only on their transphysical soul and their dignity before God, but on their unique goodness and lovability in the eyes of the Creator. And that has been our position. It's the only position that will protect humanity, civilization, and humaneness. All totalitarian viewpoints wind up imploding because they will, treating some groups as problems, they will undermine themselves. They are nothing more than regimes that try to justify, writ large, justify that the end, namely the common good, justifies the means.
Right.
We gotta kill a few million people to get to this great economic objective, right? Maoist, cultural philosophy, the great leap forward. We're just gonna, millions are gonna die when you bring all those people into a rural environment, the Khmer Rouge, right? It's okay. The end justifies the means, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the kinds of things that absolutely have to be avoided. The idea of people as burden, the idea of people as problems, the reversal of the idea that comes from religion, that people are mysteries, individual, intrinsically dignified, unique human beings with a supernatural soul, destined for life in God, in perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home. The minute we lose that, the minute we lose the religious perspective, don't think for a moment the secular perspective with its grand ideals of the common good are going to protect you. It'll come to nothing more than a Marxist totalitarianism with the butcheries of Stalin that lie at the end of the day. And so, for all intents and purposes, we have to just look at the wisdom of the great political philosophers, and above all, the wisdom of our religion that has protected it in the great Leo XIII and so many other pontiffs who have followed in the recognition of this prioritization.
I was wondering, I'm just listening to you to talk about that. One of the things that concerns me sometimes, we talk about the environment, we talk about being good stewards of the earth, and all of that is obviously an obligation. The bishops even talk about that in the sense of what's important. The Holy Father certainly has. But sometimes deep behind some of this is population control. Deep behind it in some of these organizations out there, at the end of the day, what they're really saying is too many people are the problem.
Yep. You really have to listen. Yes. Again, Doug, you absolutely have to listen to the means that they're willing to use. The great St. Augustine gave us that principle: the end does not justify the means. And it has been such an important part, not only of individuated ethics throughout the centuries, but such an important part of the development of culture, and certainly in the West and in missionary countries where this principle has been, spoken of. So the idea then that, we can use any means to get to the end of environmental stewardship. Pope Francis has been very, very leery of those kinds of efforts, because if you start saying the problem is people, then automatically you've got the materialist viewpoint. People are problems all over again. People are nothing more than social units, economic units all over again. And not only do you have the philosophy that undermines the very dignity of every individual human person and their rights, but you also have a very, very unenlightened viewpoint of economics, social theory, and economic development. Look, we've got to face facts here. Malthus is just dead wrong. And anybody who, remember Malthus?
Right, sure.
There's so-called Malthusian theory, right? And he proposed that there's a limited amount of resources, right?
Did and because there's a limited amount of resources.
Exactly.
There's a potato famine and everything else. Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he says, there's going to be an unlimited amount of wants, so you're going to have wars.
Right.
But we've never found that. Technology has always intervened. Human creativity has always intervened. We've never gotten to a point where we have outrun the resources that we need to feed the world. All we need is to take advantage of the technologies that we have at any point in time, to take advantage of new technologies, whether that might be fusion in the future. And it's coming. There's no doubt you're going to have cheap and clean energy. It's coming in the future. Solar and wind will be there, but it'll be an adjunct, I believe, to fusion in the future. You're going to have farms, vertical farms, and I know people who are developing these vertical farms right now. They're like literally 10 miles by 10 miles, and they're 25 stores, and it just produces like 100 times to 1,000 times more food per acre, right, without using soil-based, it's hydroponically based, it's computerized, all the light waves are simulated to make for the most amount of growth. You can get sometimes 10 crops in a single year, et cetera. What's my point? Technology is there. We're going to be able to use it. Population is not the problem. We'll be able to feed the population. We'll be able to house the population. We'll be able to communicate with the population. There's an interesting book that was put out. It's called Unlimited Wealth. Boy, this guy's name is going to slip my mind for just a second. But you just look up that book, Unlimited Wealth, where he actually talks about technology as the X factor that interrupts what's called Malthusian Theory of unlimited wants plus scarce resources is going to equal wars and famines. It just doesn't work that way. It's just oversimplified.
In many ways today, I mean, we could basically feed people around the globe if we could cut out for all of the government waste and also the stealing that goes on when many of these things are given away and given are basically taken and sold on the black market. And so a lot of that could be handled if we could just get our act together on that. Let me ask you, since we're talking about forming your Catholic conscience and preparing to vote and what are the resources people can use, let's get to one more question before we just run out of time. Just quickly, Father, this person says, please tell me how I should vote. I don't think we can do that, but I cannot vote for one candidate. I have grave misgivings about the other. We've heard that. What is the right and Catholic decision? I need your wisdom. So let's say one person is a person who this person realizes maybe on the life issues that that person is incredibly problematic and possibly can't vote for that person, and the other person they're just not sure about. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, here's what the bishops advise. The bishops advise that you do vote, and what obviously they're going to advise is that you take out that that Voters Guide 2016 of the USCCB. That's the United States Council of Catholic Bishops. Again, just put Bishops Voters Guide 2016 into your Google. Just zoom down to Part 3. Spend 15 minutes looking through those principles, the priorities of those principles, and the rationale for that priority. Just reflect on that and try to do the best the best prudential judgment you can to vote for the person that you think. Not voting isn't going to help.
Right, exactly.
You got to vote for somebody, find the right person given those principles, those priorities, the one that best fits it.
Use your rights.
That's probably the best you can do.
We need to live out our religious liberty, use your rights before we lose them. Thank you so much, Father Spitzer. We'll know better next week. And it's interesting, next week we're going to go, what is the evidence for purgatory? Hopefully that's not a function of the results of the election, but we shall see. Joining Father Spitzer, see you next week. And again, what is the evidence for purgatory will be our next topic. Don't forget that we have the EWTN website. That's there, EWTN.com/. You can see it right on Vote. Are you prepared to vote? Doing good. There's a whole bunch of information there, as Father Spitzer was alluding to. A lot of it is also on our EWTN website. Don't forget to look for us on TV and radio. Don't forget our next week's topic, and don't forget to go out and vote. And I'm Doug Keck. Thank you for joining us here at the intersection of faith and reason. Father Spitzer's Universe. We'll see you next week. God bless.